So to clarify an issue that keeps coming up, and a lot of you have you sort of hit me up with questions, and I always appreciate the interest. But one question I keep getting is, I want to do an ICO. I don't want to go offshore with my ICO entity, but I'm not going to sell to U.S. citizens. Can I do it? And the answer is yes, right? You absolutely can. You know, your ICO isn't dictated, right? You have to think of the terms of offering. And when the best way to sort of describe an offering, which is a legal term of art, is that you are throwing your solicitation sort of out into space, right? Out into the void, and you don't know who's going to echo back, right? That's an offering. You don't necessarily know who you're kind of approaching. You may generally know, but you don't know from like an individual standpoint. And so, you know, when you look at Regulation S, which is the securities exemption that relates to sales to non-U.S. residents, that's always been sort of wide open, right? That there are no restrictions in terms of accredited, non-accredited. There are no restrictions in terms of manner of solicitation, and there never were, right? If you go to pre-Jobs Act day, there wasn't those restrictions either. So when you're looking at a offshore ICO from a domestic structure, you can definitely do it, because ultimately, even if you're selling a security token, you're relying on Regulation S, which allows you to sort of sell this in a general manner and to not have to worry about the accredited, non-accredited delineation. So but that having been said, you need to be very, very, very cognizant and careful that you aren't somehow, whether accidentally or not, soliciting U.S. residents, of course. But the question becomes, well, where do I domicile, right, in the States? And you know, I've addressed that before. I think Wyoming right now, even, you know, in the non-crypto context, is your ideal domicile. Now that they've passed crypto-friendly legislation, I think it's really the only place to incorporate. Now, I want to take that a step further, because when you're talking about offshore, you're talking about tax benefits, you're talking about asset protection benefits. And I want to talk about specifically about the asset protection benefits. And, you know, people don't realize this because you read a lot about these Alaskan spendthrift trusts, right, which are these self-settled trusts, meaning a trust that you create and settle and you name yourself the beneficiary. And there's a lot of talk about how those are creditor-proof. Well, Wyoming has what I believe a even better statute, okay? And it allows you to create a trust, put assets in trust, and name yourself the beneficiary of that trust. And those assets can be protected from creditors, right? And I'll get to why that's important in an ICO context in a second. But what I really, really like about it, which you do not see in Alaska, but you see in offshore structures like the Cook Islands. I've talked about Cook Islands Trust before, and they have what's called the protector, right? You have a trustee who sort of is the manager of the trust assets, and then you have what's called a protector. And that protector has certain limited abilities, right, that trigger at certain occasions. So in Wyoming, right, that protector, who could be like a close friend or something like that, has the ability to control distributions at certain times, has the ability to change the domicile of the trust, has these abilities that when it comes down to litigation and it comes down to creditors pursuing the trust or the individual who has put the assets in the trust, that protector comes into play and can take steps that will minimize the ability of that creditor to recover what is in trust, right? Recover the assets of, say, you being the trust settler, right? You being the trust person who formed the trust. Now, combine that with no state income tax, no, you know, great privacy laws. I think Wyoming, right, the trust structure is ideal, and it's preferable and far less expensive than what you'll find in Alaska. So I like that. Now, why do I like it in connection with the offshore ICO or even a domestic ICO? Is that when you have an entity, right, any sort of entity, and you're talking about asset protection strategies, and this goes beyond just crypto, but when you're dealing with crypto, you're dealing with something that's super high risk at the moment. Well, one of the great structures that you can create is to take your, let's say, your Wyoming LLC and those membership units that you own and put those in trust, right? Form a Wyoming trust, put your shares, right, or your membership units of your Wyoming entity in trust, so they're the nominal owner of that, and you remain the beneficiary. So you remain in control of your company, but you put a wall in between the company's activities, an additional wall in between the company's activities and your personal assets and your interest in that. And so a lot of these crypto companies, right, especially these ICO companies, they're top heavy. They're super valuable in terms of IP, right? And that's what people ultimately would go after if you're involved in litigation. So one of the perfect ways to insulate IP and other like fixed assets, and especially intangible fixed assets like patents, technologies, all sorts of things like that, is to do this sort of entity trust structure where the trust remains the nominal shareholder, you may remain the beneficiary of the trust. So you keep control, you keep the benefits of owning the shares, but you've put this wall in between the actions of the company and the actions of a creditor. And so it's a beautiful structure for something like an offshore ICO or even a domestic ICO, in so much that you're able to insulate yourself further than just the normal protections of like an LLC or a corporation. So again, Wyoming, love Wyoming. There's like 10 people there. Great place. I haven't been there, but phenomenal asset protection laws, phenomenal corporate laws, becoming very crypto friendly, which is great. And I think when you add the trust structure to it, which is really a minimal cost and it's sort of a minimal event, with this protector aspect that you really only see in offshore trusts, I think it makes it really one of your best options domestically in terms of asset protection and insulating yourself from potential creditors, litigation, things like that, which obviously come up in business, and they come up or tend to come up or could come up a lot in more high-risk, cutting-edge businesses like blockchain and cryptocurrency. So if you have any questions, as always, reach out to me. I love talking to you guys. I'm Tracy. I'll check you out.